Hi, I'm Dr. Shook, and today I'd like to share with you my approach to supporting thyroid dysfunction. And this is something that's very broad. There are a lot of different ways that the thyroid can break down. If you have not seen my whiteboard video where I walk through the physiology of the thyroid, and it's really important. It's really designed for the layperson. It's designed to walk you through and show you that there are at least 24 physiological ways that your thyroid chemistry can break down, and that can all impact how you feel. So many people come to us and reach out to us that have all the thyroid related symptoms, but their labs are normal, or they're taking thyroid hormone replacement and they just don't feel well. So that's the majority of people that we tend to work with are people that are still having symptoms despite being told that everything is okay or despite being medicated. And that's because there are a lot of pieces of the thyroid physiology that can break down that have to be considered. Now, when you layer on top of that the fact that industrial and agricultural chemicals that are being used, currently there's scientific literature that is peer-reviewed, indexed medical literature. All that means is that there's very high-quality literature that shows that a lot of chemicals are disrupting our thyroid hormone physiology and at every step of the process. So when you combine those things, we're looking at probably 50 or more ways that the thyroid physiology can break down. And thyroid hormone replacement only addresses one. So that's really important that you understand. If you haven't seen that video, please you can go back to our page and look at that video. It's been viewed about 5.2 million times. It's really important that you have that basic information. And it is helphashimotosdisease.com. If you just go to helphashimotosdisease.com, you're going to be able to find it. If you go to drbradshuk.com, you'll be able to find it there as well. But it's been viewed a lot. It's really important video that you understand. So if you haven't seen that yet, please go back and watch that, and then you can come back and this will make a little bit more sense why we take the approach we take. So the important thing to understand is that the approach that I take is very much a science-based approach. Okay, so I like repeatable testing. I like to be able to do tests with people that we can then retest in the future and that are reproducible. And that seems like that would be something that you would go without saying. Like, you shouldn't have to say that you take an approach of testing that is reproducible. But so many people are out there utilizing different types of approaches to help them try to figure out what type of dietary approaches they need, supplementation they need, what their problems are that could be actually driving some of the dysfunction and the symptoms that they're having. And they'll do things like, muscle testing. And listen, I'm not saying that doesn't work, but I will say this. I've had a lot of people that are the best, people that do muscle testing that are considered some of the best in the world, muscle test me, and then I go to someone else and they get different results. So if it's not reproducible, I don't do it. So I lean towards blood testing, urinary testing, stool testing, and things that give us quantifiable, objective information. Okay, that's my approach. That's the approach we take, and that's what has worked best for us. I think that's what appeals to me. And I like to use as much evidence and support as I can that's measurable behind the protocols that we take and use. So just as a kind of an overview, so let me kind of go through. We take a three-step approach. We detect the problems first, we work to remove the problems second, and then we repair the damage that was done from these issues. Okay, so that's the three-step approach. This is a framework: detect, remove, repair. Okay, it's very simple framework that keeps us on the right path. If we're doing this right and we're using our testing, it keeps us working and moving in the right direction. And we don't get lost, because these are complex issues. We're looking at how the body works together and trying to determine if there's anything that's breaking down that is resulting in thyroid dysfunction or these thyroid related symptoms. And you've got to look at all the systems of the body. This is a systems-based approach. This is a complex system. We're looking at how different systems of the body affect and interact with each other. And so we have to cast a wide net to help us determine what these problems are, so that we can put together plans to either remove the issues, the problems that we find, and then repair the damage. Okay, so it starts with detecting, figuring out what's driving the symptoms that you're having. So what we do is we start, and I've listed a lot of the tests, and I realized as I got closer to the bottom that we need to get a lot of testing. And listen, the more testing that we can get, the more specific of a plan that is more precise based on your unique needs, we can put together. So it's important to understand that the more data that we have, the more information we have, the more specific we can be with any intervention, the better opportunity that we have to determine what's causing your symptoms to begin with. So gathering data is really important. So these tests that I'm going to kind of go through with you are most important, I think. And we do different degrees of this based on the person and what they need and their unique situations. So let's go through. So where we start with our process of detection is we get a comprehensive metabolic panel that's expanded. Now this is not any type of, this is not a panel that you're going to be able to go to your primary care physician, you're going to be able to go to your endocrinologist or any of your physicians and say, hey, I want to get a comprehensive metabolic panel. They have something like that on their test menu, but it is not what we order. We don't have anything else to call it. I guess we could call it Dr. Shook's metabolic panel. But this is much different than anything that you're going to get that's called a metabolic panel, because they're not all the same. It's not like there's one line that they check that's metabolic panel and that's what we get and they get. It's a generic broad term that's used to describe usually some basic markers that are put into a panel that is considered comprehensive by a lot of different doctors. This is far more expanded than that, far more expanded. So let me go through. So comprehensive metabolic panel, this is blood panel. This is done to allow us to see where's your foundational body chemistry, right? Where are some of the classical biomarkers? So we start with, and this is really not in an order of priority, but these are all very important. We start with looking at inflammatory markers first. So we look at things like C-reactive protein and homocysteine. This inflammatory load is very important to understand because it disrupts your thyroid hormone physiology. It disrupts a lot of your hormonal physiology very significantly. You have to know if there's inflammation. If there's inflammation present, you want to know why. Why is it present? What is driving it? What's causing it? Because I'm telling you now, if you're inflamed, if you have high inflammatory load and you ignore that, you're not going to feel well. You're not going to feel well. And it's critical. So it's one of the first things we look at. And what I might add to this is that we also want to check antibodies. So I'm just going to put AB. Now when I say antibodies, I look at antibodies to the thyroid very, very commonly. Now if you don't know if you have an autoimmune thyroid condition like Hashimoto's or Graves' disease, then this is absolutely something we do on almost every single person. We check thyroid antibodies because that is the most common autoimmune condition. But we also look at antibodies to a lot of other tissues. It's not always done in this panel. Sometimes we do it in our extensive immune testing, which is very, very broad and it's specific based on the individual. But we would look at antibodies to the thyroid, we look at C-reactive protein, homocysteine, because inflammation is critical that you understand if that's occurring, if you have a high inflammatory load. You've got to figure out where it's coming from if it's present. And then if there's autoimmunity, you've got to do, if you're autoimmune, as a byproduct of autoimmunity, you're going to have a high inflammatory load. And I don't want to get into all the details. When we're looking at the immune system and we're looking at autoimmunity, we're considering the fact that you have a high inflammatory load of immune proteins called cytokines that wreak a lot of havoc. They're not observable in the C-reactive protein or homocysteine. So we're looking at inflammation and autoimmunity, number one. Number two, we want to look at a CBC, complete blood count with differential. We want to look at the red blood cells. We want to see the characteristics of the red blood cells. Are they too big? Are they too small? Are they the wrong color? If they are, then we're going to have a problem carrying oxygen throughout the body to the cells of the body. Do you think that's going to cause things like fatigue, like brain fog? Do you think that's going to cause energy production issues? I promise you it will, because every cell in your body has to have oxygen, which those red blood cells carry. So we want to know if there's a dysfunction of the red blood cell. If there is, we want to investigate that. It's really important to understand why there's a problem, because a lot of times there are things that we can do to fix it and support it. Sometimes there aren't, but we need to know what your problems are, right? So we have to cast a very wide net. Now we want to look at the white blood cells too. So a CBC with differential is red blood cells and their characteristics, white blood cell total, and the different quantities of the different types of white blood cells. White blood cells are immune-based cells. The different amounts of the specific types give us clues as to what the immune system is doing. Okay, so it's really important to look at total white blood cells. If we want to look at the total, if it's high, we suspect more of an infection or other process. If it's low, we suspect suppression of the immune system, and there's various things that can drive that. So we're putting together these pieces of the puzzle, these clues, especially if we're looking at the thyroid, because what's the number one cause of low thyroid, of a low thyroid in the United States, probably in the world? It's Hashimoto's thyroiditis. It's an autoimmune process, which we suspect how many? 90%. So 9 out of every 10 people that have a low thyroid, that are hypothyroid, that this is the autoimmune process is actually driving it. So we want to know, because if there's an immune process, if there's an autoimmune process driving it, that's really important, because we can look at the immune system and we can investigate it, as we will further down in these tests, to help us better understand what the immune system is reacting to, so that we can remove those things. Remember, remove is coming up. We're going to detect the problems first, then we're going to put together a strategy, removing problems and replacing needed nutrients. We're going to be doing, this gets kind of complex, but as a framework, detecting, removing, repairing, right? So we want to know what's driving the immune response. We're looking at the immune system very closely here with the CBC. Then we're going to get into blood sugar. We're going to look at things like your fasting glucose and a hemoglobin A1C. This is about the hemoglobin A1C is a window into blood sugar fluctuation over a 3-month period, approximately 3-month period. So we want to see that, because a lot of people have normal glucose, which would be your fasting blood sugar, but their A1C is elevated because they've had a lot of fluctuations over time. Now, why would blood sugar and these things be relevant to the thyroid? Because we are taking a systems-based approach, meaning that because we know this, okay? We know if the blood sugar is fluctuating and the blood sugar's coming up and spiking and dipping, or if it's higher, what ends up happening is that we have elevated insulin. Okay, insulin is the hormone made by your pancreas that helps to lower blood sugar, and insulin's inflammatory. Insulin causes an increase in one of your immune cytokines. Okay, this is one of the little proteins I was talking about that's made by the immune system with autoimmunity, called interleukin-6. And interleukin-6 is inflammatory. It promotes an inflammatory response, and that can drive the immune process. That can also disrupt and create, listen, any inflammatory load, period, will decrease sensitivity of the cells of your body to your hormones. And your thyroid hormone is really important, right? So that's one of why might you still have symptoms when your labs look normal or you're taking medications? You still don't feel well. Well, you've got to consider the inflammatory load. So we're looking for things that drive inflammation. We also know that if blood sugar is spiking and dipping, it's going to wreak havoc on your adrenal gland function and the hormones that they contribute to the production of and have an influence upon. So we're looking at things like your stress hormone cortisol, your sex hormones, all your sex hormones, your testosterone, your estrogen, and imbalances there in estrogen and progesterone could absolutely be contributed to by blood sugar fluctuations. I can't tell you how many times we see this. Blood sugar fluctuations driving testosterone dominance in women, driving problems like PCOS. So we want to look at blood sugar. Again, I don't want to get too much into potential problems that these can cause as much as just sharing with you our approach. It's really important we look at these things because they affect, these markers give us a window into your physiology, into your chemistry and what's happening, so that we can have a better idea of what type of interventions to utilize for you specifically, right? Unique to you. This is where we come down to what we call precision medicine. So we're trying to put together a very precise plan for you based on all these characteristics, okay? So blood sugar is really important. Looking at the liver and blood proteins next. So the liver is absolutely critical for so many different physiological functions, from detoxification to conversion of your thyroid hormone, T4 to T3. There's so many biochemical processes, hundreds of biochemical processes that the liver is involved in. So we want to look at the liver very closely, because we know, just if we're talking about the thyroid, if your primary thyroid hormone is T4, it's basically inactive. It does have some physiological impact throughout the body, but it doesn't drive the metabolism. It's T3 that drives the metabolism. Most of that conversion of T4 to T3 occurs in the liver. So does that sound like something that'd be very important? Obviously, it's very, very important. And then also the liver it's important with the breakdown and clearance of hormones from your body. this may sound like you may think, well, I've got a thyroid problem, which is a hormone, but you're talking about like the liver and breaking down estrogens and other things and testosterone. How is that related to the thyroid? It's very, very, very much related. So you can go back to my whiteboard video, again, where I explain the physiology, because I do talk about the estrogens and how they can impair and decrease the body's ability to be able to use thyroid hormone that's in circulation. It's very relevant, and it's a very common problem. So we want to look at the liver function for so many different issues. We'll kind of talk about them down here as I get into hormone testing and hormone metabolites that we look at. Blood proteins. I like to look at the total blood protein, and I like to look at the two proteins we add together to get the total, albumin and globulin, because they can give me windows into some things I don't want to get into. It's a little too technical, but they can, if there's GI tract dysfunction or there's poor acidity of the gut, sometimes we'll see these protein levels be suboptimal. They won't be optimal. They won't be lab low or necessarily lab high, but they won't be in ideal ranges. So when I look at this, I'm not just looking at lab high and lab low numbers. I'm actually looking at more narrow ranges we call functional ranges as well. So it's more optimal, what we think is more optimal. We're not just looking at the pathological ranges, the lab high and lab low. So very important here, liver and proteins, blood proteins, thyroid. Now I look at 9 thyroid-related markers. Most people only get, what, TSH checked, right? TSH is inadequate. It's just not adequate. There's a lot more that we need to consider for thyroid hormone physiology. So I look at thyroid plus 9 thyroid-related markers, everything from TSH to total T4 to total T3, free T4, free T3. We're going to look at T3 uptake, reverse T3. We're going to look usually at a thyroid index, and then the antibodies, at least the antibodies primarily associated with Hashimoto's, which are thyroid peroxidase or TPO antibodies, and then thyroglobulin antibodies. That's actually 10. And then if we wanted to, we could go further and look at some of the antibodies related to Graves. But most of the people that I work with that have Graves have already been worked up, and they're looking for someone to help them identify and try to work on the driving processes behind the autoimmunity itself. So that's what I do a lot of. That's probably what I do the most, is work with people on what drives autoimmunity. But we have to, we understand, and I've learned a lot of these other functional breakdowns in the thyroid chemistry. It's really just looking at the whole person, right? It's really what it comes down to. So again, thyroid markers very, very thoroughly. It's never looked at this way. Full iron panel. So I look at 5 different markers. I look at serum iron and ferritin. Ferritin is really the most important marker for iron status in the body. It's the stored form of iron. Your serum iron is a very, very small percentage of the iron in the body, and a lot of times that's what's ordered. It's not a good reflection. There's a few things with iron. Ferritin, if ferritin's high, it could also be driven by a high inflammatory load. Again, I don't want to get too technical, but this is really important. Iron is a very important mineral for so many different physiological processes. You've got to have it in the right balance. Too much iron can be very toxic and very poisonous to the body, but the deficiencies in iron can create problems with conversion and protein production and a lot of different issues in the liver especially. Lipids, we want to look at cholesterol, we want to look at HDL, LDL, triglycerides. We also, I don't always order it, but we can also get an NMR test, which I will order. Just depends on how these lipids come back. Sometimes I'll recommend it. Sometimes I get it in advance if we have a history of cardiovascular disease in the family, and then also if there's the NMR test, I'll explain what it is. Also, if the person has a history of like higher cholesterol and they're really worried about it, or they're on a statin medication, I want to get the NMR. It's a nuclear magnetic resonance. So it's basically an MRI of the cholesterol in your body, and it looks at the droplet size. And we want those droplets, if we have the really tiny droplets, they're more associated with cardiovascular disease and risk. And when we combine these lipids in this specialized test with the C-reactive protein, the inflammatory markers, and homocysteine, which we know both of these things, CRP and homocysteine, inflammatory markers, are associated with a greater increased risk of cardiovascular disease, heart disease, strokes, and even neurodegenerative conditions, brain degenerative conditions, which is really, we're reaching epidemic levels around the world with this. I mean, it is really, when you start looking at what's being projected for rates of these problems, it is horrifying. And so how we address this, guys, we've got to figure out these problems. We've got to understand what's going on, but then we've got to put together interventions to help you address these things, because a lot of these problems aren't medicatable. They're just not. There's a time and place for medications with some of the problems that we find, but the most important thing is, for most of these problems, is that it's going to be a dietary, a lifestyle-based interventions that we want to make, and then also using temporary vitamins, minerals, and herbs to help support the body chemistry. And then what we want to do is get off of those things. I'm not a huge fan of people staying on nutritional supplements forever. I think it is important to use them, especially during the healing phases, but not forever. I'm probably the only person you're going to hear actually tell you that you shouldn't take vitamins forever, especially someone that works with this type of approach to healthcare. So, and improving your health. Most people are, well, I won't get into that, but yes. So lipids, okay, nuclear magnetic NMR test. Now, vitamin D is critically important, especially when we're looking at the thyroid. There's so many different aspects of and ways that vitamin D impacts your physiology and your chemistry. It's very, very important. I'll just say one of the most important things for us, because most people have some sort of autoimmune condition when they're hypothyroid, or they have these thyroid-related symptoms. They have autoimmunity. And vitamin D helps with the production of something called regulatory cells of the immune system. They're called regulatory T cells. And these regulatory cells, they help to balance the immune cells that are produced. So think about this. If your immune system's attacking your body, which it should be what? It should be protecting it, right? Your immune system's not there to destroy you, it's there to protect you. So if your immune system's attacking you, destroying your tissues, then does that sound like it's properly regulated? Does that sound like a regulated immune system? It's not. So a lot of times people are very deficient in vitamin D. So we want to shoot to get their vitamin D in the top of the lab range. So usually that's a serum level of around 70, bloodstream level around 70, sometimes even higher than that, to help with optimal regulatory cell production. Most people are horribly low in this. Now, so vitamin D is critical, and there's a lot of other benefits to vitamin D. Urinalysis is also very important. I'm looking for chronic and hidden infections in people, and I like to look for urinalysis. We very, very frequently find asymptomatic or no symptom urinary tract infections, and that's an infection. That's something that needs to be identified. We need to know if it's occurring, and it needs to go away so that the immune system is not constantly being stimulated. Because what you'll find is, we'll talk a little bit more about it when we get down to the immune-based testing, that chronic infections are major drivers of the immune response. And if you're autoimmune, we want to identify everything possible that's driving an immune response. And especially if it's something like an infection, if it's something like a food sensitivity, or if it's an environmental chemical, then we want to know what that is so that we can work to remove it, to eliminate it, and so the body and the immune system can calm down. We see that there's a lot of benefit from doing that, especially when we're looking at the autoimmune process. So, okay, so this is and then electrolytes. We will also look at electrolytes with the metabolic panel. And there's other stuff that's in there, but those are the main things that I look at. Now, what we would do in addition to this are these things. Now, I'm not going to elaborate as much just because this will take us 30 minutes. The stool panel. So I very commonly order, and this is not a stool panel that you get done at your hospital that looks for C. diff. Okay, the stool panel that we order is very comprehensive. It's very comprehensive. We use specialized labs that this is all they do is test stool for different types of bacteria. They look for different types of fungal infections that can be present. They look for parasites. They help us. We measure inflammatory chemistry in most of these stool panels. We'll also look at different types of fats that are normally produced by gut bacteria to see if they're present or not in the stool. If they're not there, that's not a good sign, because they do help with regeneration of the gut. We look at the localized immune system there. So we look at different immune markers in the stool. We look at blood. We look at undigested fibers and undigested fats to see if there's if there's insufficiency, if the pancreas and the gallbladder aren't working properly, we can get some markers there that help us to better understand what's going on. So it's very, very useful because chronic infections often occur here in the stool, in the bowel. Yeast infections often occur there. Parasites are very frequently found in these stool panels. Lots of things occur. And the thing about the gut is that it is a barrier. It keeps things, so the things that are digesting in your digestive tract should stay there unless the body and the intestinal wall selectively lets it through into the bloodstream. Okay, it's really important that it stays in the gut and in the digestive tract so it can be properly eliminated. So different types of hormones, all of the hormones that you make, your liver is breaking them down, puts them into the bile. Okay, primarily into the bile. Your kidneys eliminate it. You can also sweat some of these byproducts out. But it's a lot of the hormones that your body, the detoxification process, your body breaks them down, puts them into the bile. The bile eliminates them or puts them into the stool, and then they're eliminated with your bowel movements. So the gut wall itself can break down, and through the work of some very brilliant researchers, we believe that the gut is the gateway to autoimmunity. So if you have an autoimmune thyroid condition and problem where your body is attacking the thyroid, and we know that the gut is critical. You know, we've heard of this term of leaky gut, and I've done a lot of videos on intestinal permeability and leaky gut. This is a critical piece of the puzzle right here. Okay, stool panel. So this is probably, I don't know that these are actually in the order that I would recommend as prioritization, but they're probably pretty close to that. So stool panels are critical for understanding what's driving the immune system, what is happening. You know, the gut's a very important place to look. Okay, so beyond that, cortisol. We typically will look at your stress hormone cortisol. We'll do a 24-hour assessment of cortisol. So we'll typically take 4 samples of cortisol. Usually this can be done salivary, this can be done urinary, and we use both. And we check it at 4 different times throughout the day, and we look to see what your cortisol total quantities, we want to estimate the total quantity produced for a day to see what your levels are like. And we also want to look to see if the rhythm of production is normal. If it's not, this gets complex, but you know, it's a critical hormone to assess and understand what's occurring. It's critical for energy levels. It's critical for the integrity and health of all of the barrier systems in your body. So the gut wall, the blood-brain barrier, the lung barrier, the skin, everything cortisol is critical for assessment of what could be affecting these different systems, which is important. If your cortisol is very high and elevated, it will create problems with conversion of your T4 to T3, right? Which is important, right? We're talking about thyroid-related symptoms. So I could go on and on about every one of these things. We need to keep it a little bit more brief. It's not really the point to go, you know, a full explanation of each one of these. You can look at any of the hundreds of videos that we have where I talk about these in more detail if you need to. So hormones. Hormones are next. Typically I'm going to look at steroid hormones. Your steroid hormones are the hormones that are going to be produced like your progesterone, your cortisol, your stress hormone, your DHEA, estrogens, the different types of estrogens, your testosterone and different metabolites of testosterone. Looking at these hormones is absolutely critical because they have anabolic effects. Many of these hormones, your estrogen, your testosterone, have effects on healing of the body. So if you're deficient, we need to look at the chemistry and say, well, why are you deficient, right? If there's a problem there, because there are a lot of ways that chemistry can break down. And I've done a ton of videos on adrenal. If you search adrenals, if you search adrenals and thyroid on like my channel or any of the videos we've created, you're going to find where I explain this and I draw out the chemistry a bit, and it can be eye-opening, especially if you have polycystic ovarian syndrome, if you have problems with progesterone or estrogen imbalances. It all comes back a lot of times, in most cases, to blood sugar, okay, and cortisol, your stress hormone. It drives a process that we call a pregnenolone steal. Okay, it might not mean anything to you here and be confusing, but just want you to know that it's something we want to look at. There's a lot that we can do from a dietary and lifestyle perspective. We've got to figure out what's going on with the adrenals, okay, and with your hormones. The next thing we want to look at are typically our hormone metabolites. So hormone metabolites are critical because hormone metabolites, when your body, there are 4 primary stages of the production and ultimately the elimination of the hormones that your body makes. So you produce it, okay, you produce the hormone, a gland produces it. You then transport the hormone through the body in the blood typically on these proteins here. So remember the proteins I mentioned that we look at, the albumin and globulin. So there's things like sex hormone binding globulins, so part of these proteins. Thyroid hormone binding globulins, they carry the hormone through the blood and then they release it so it's in its free form and usable by the cells of your body. So it's really important that you understand we look at these hormone metabolites because there's a production, a transportation, there's a utilization at the cell, and then there's an elimination. See, all these hormones have to be eliminated. What eliminates these hormones? It's our friend the liver, right? Our friend the liver. And so there's different phases of elimination that the liver goes through. Now, when you break down these hormones, before they're eliminated, they get metabolized, partially broken down. If you have a poor, what we call phase 2 system, right? So there's the liver has a phase 1 detoxification and a phase 2, and sometimes we even call the bile's elimination of a lot of that waste phase 3. But phase 1 and phase 2 are really important to understand. If a lot of people, because what they'll do is their hormones, like their estrogens, will go through phase 1 and they'll make all these metabolites that can be very dangerous to your health, like 16-hydroxy, 16-OH, that's 16-hydroxy. Then there's 4-hydroxy, and then 2-hydroxy. And there are a lot of other forms of these metabolites. However, the 16-hydroxy is more associated with tissue proliferation, cyst formation. I've seen it seems like it's a lot higher tends to be higher in women that have had endometriosis. 4-hydroxy, this is the one that is carcinogenic. It's known to be damaging to the DNA. It's more associated with cancers, breast cancer, those types of things. 2-hydroxy is the preferred pathway. This is how we want these to metabolize. So we can actually, and we do this a lot, this is something I do almost all the time, is hormone metabolites. We look at these hormones very, very carefully to see how to get better insight into liver biotransformation or elimination. Okay, it's really important to look at this because if these are high, first of all, they predispose you to a lot of potential problems. These have weak effects. They can attach themselves. So in your systemic circulation, they can attach themselves to the cells of the body. They can block the estrogens that we want from attaching to the cell and stimulating the body in a preferred way. So we've got to look at this. This is why we get hormone metabolites. Then extensive immune testing. And this could be seriously the immune testing. We could do a whole whiteboard video and I would have it full of potential immune testing. The most important thing when we're looking at immune-based testing is that we look at 3 different categories of things that drive the immune response. So we want to look at primarily food sensitivities, and we're talking IgG and IgA immune responses, not IgE, which is anaphylactic. If you go to your doctor and you say, hey, I want to get food sensitivities, they're going to say, most of them, I don't think you really need that. And if they do it, it's going to be IgE. It's not what we're looking for with our application here. That's an anaphylactic response like throat and tongue swelling. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for sensitivities. We're looking at a different part of the immune system. So food sensitivities, we want to look at for pathogen screening. We want to look for infections, potential infections, signs of potential infections or past infections, current infections. This is really important because if there's anything that's chronic, like long-term infection, it drives the immune response. The reason we're looking at all these immune-based markers is because if there's something that's driving the immune response, we have to know what that is. We have to know what it is because can we eliminate it? Can we decrease that immune response, calm the immune system down? Because we see that oftentimes when we do that, there's a really significant effect on the autoimmunity, on the immune response against the body and the tissues that it can actually calm down, because there's this thing called molecular mimicry where the food or the bacteria or the fungus or the parasites causing your body to attack not only the foreign thing, but also your tissues that look like it. It's molecular mimicry. It looks like you, so your body can't tell you, your immune system can't tell it apart, causes you to start attacking your own tissues. So critical information here. And then as we go further, looking at genetics and your unique genetic blueprint is critical. I could go into this all day. This is really an important thing to look at. Nutrients and nutrient deficiencies, absolutely vital information. How can you carry out normal chemistry if you have deficiencies of nutrients, vitamins, minerals? And then toxins. Toxins, last but definitely not least, I think this is probably toxins. Evaluating how I look at toxins, or I look at urinary toxins that are being eliminated. These are metals. These are all kinds of industrial and agricultural chemicals that are being used. And then I look at the urinary elimination, and then I also look at immune system responses to them. So I look at a chemical reactivity screen, and we can do that looking to see if the immune system is reacting abnormally to things like metals, BPA, different types of compounds we commonly find. When you look at all this together, you get an incredible picture of your unique current state of health, the immune system, and there's so many different markers here that help us to understand what's happening to you. That this allows me to get great insight into what we could specifically do, what we need to remove, what we need to repair. And typically, so what happens is after we detect this, we look at all this information, we put it together in a plan, and typically there are phases to it. Like you can't usually work on all of it at once, but you prioritize what you find and you work through it in phases. So 1 or 2 months per phase, and then you change and you work to the next phase. And so we typically remove things that we find with diet, supplements, and then medications if needed. And once we've done that removal process, we work on repairing. So again, you use similar tools, you use similar framework, but different tools: diet, supplementation, and medication. And ultimately the goal is to get you as healthy as possible, get you off of any specialized diet, get you off of supplementation, so you're not taking supplements long term, so that your body can do what it needs. And guess what? You get your nutrients from good quality food. Don't spend your money on a bunch of supplements long term. I mean, short term, we have to use a lot of these tools to help us with healing the body, optimally healing the body, getting rid of infections, getting rid of yeast, supporting optimal digestion, all these things that we can use as tools to help us heal. But long term, and ultimately, I don't want you doing that. I want you to learn from the process so that you can help yourself, right? So you're not dependent on any doctors. That's ultimately, let the body do what it does. Let's figure out what's going on. Let's remove it and get it, and so that the body remove any types of problems, so that the body can function optimally and normally. Let's get those things out of its way, and let's just let it do its thing. Let's let it work, because I'm telling you what, we don't know we don't know how to create life. We don't know how to heal the body. We don't know how to heal or give life to something. We know that the body is miraculous. It's amazing. It is self-healing. It is always working to help to heal. So what we want to do is figure out to the best of our ability what's going on, help remove those things so that the body can thrive and function and heal and be restored ultimately. So this is the framework I wanted to go through with you. I've gone a lot longer than I expected, but it's like every time I get into talking about these tests, you know, I feel like it deserves some elaboration and explanation. So I want to give that to you. I hope this has been helpful. You know, if you have any questions, if you haven't seen the whiteboard video, you can go to, like I said, helphashimotosdisease.com. That's the whiteboard video. You can go to drbradshuk.com, and you can also see the video there where I talk about the thyroid physiology. And if you need help, if you're stuck, I work with people around the world, across the United States. I work with people in other countries. And what we do is we help them to get this kind of testing. I will consult with them and help them put together a picture. We'll put together a plan, and we will help you to work on trying to get your, as healthy as possible and get your health back. If you're interested in that and you'd like to know more about those details and the process of how we work with people, just go to our website at drbradshuk.com. There's an application for care page. You'll just see a tab, click on application for care, and you can read through it. If you have any questions or you'd like to request an appointment, you can do so there. But I hope this has been helpful. I really appreciate you joining me today. Sorry if we got a little bit long-winded, but I think it's important that we go through this in a little bit more detail. I appreciate you. Hope you have a wonderful day. Talk to you soon. Thanks.